Before the success stories, the progress, there was you. You who made a choice to grow, to inspire, to overcome your own challenges. At NASM, we're in service of your limitless potential because when you keep growing, we all get stronger. And we'll never stop making your journey our mission. Join the fitness leader. Become a fitness leader. Become a certified personal trainer.
You're listening to the Peak Physique Podcast with Andre Adams on the NASM Podcast Network.
Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the NASM Peak Physique Podcast. I'm your host, your boy Andre Adams, IFBB Olympian and NASM Master Trainer. On deck today, we're going to talk about the best strategies for pre, intra, and post-workout nutrition. In this episode, you can expect me to break down some best practices. We'll talk about how to maximize hypertrophy and muscular development for bodybuilding by optimizing your pre, intra, and post-workout nutrition. I'd love to touch on a little bit of difference between performance athletes versus physique and bodybuilding athletes. How could that nutrition vary depending on different goals? And let's just dive right in. Why is pre-workout nutrition, timing, why is any of this even important? Well, for one, we want to make sure that your body is in an optimal state to fuel your workout and, really just prime your body up so that you've got enough glucose, you've got enough energy and fuel to get a really good, intense training session. Now, for bodybuilding, where this can tend to vary a little bit different from, let's say, a cyclist or an MMA athlete, is our goal is specifically to maximize hypertrophy. Now, how can we do that? Well, we want to stimulate things like blood flow and circulation. We want to provide enough glucose to, help A, fuel the workout, but B, also signal to the muscles to open up and receive some of those amino acids for the goal of building muscle, right? It's a little different. And we'll talk about some of those distinctions between different sports and how you can really maximize your muscular development. So the goal with bodybuilding is always to keep the body in an anabolic state, right? Our bodies can be in one of two states. We're either catabolic, where we are starting to consume and break down muscle tissue. We call it muscle wasting, right? And converting those amino acids from the muscle tissues into glucose to fuel the body. Or we're in an anabolic state where we're actually building muscle, right? And we're starting to store some of those nutrients and things like this that are circulating in the body. So bodybuilding, obviously, we want to stay as anabolic as possible. And a lot of that is dependent on our macro and micronutrition. Now, of course, one of the most important and optimal times to focus on nutrition is right around your workouts. And this is where I see not just athletes, but, I'll go as far as to say even your average gym goer, they're still at some level bodybuilding, right? If it's a muscular development or physique goal, right? You want to tighten up the midsection a little bit, get that summer body ready. That's bodybuilding. And I think one thing that's often overlooked is the nutrition. So a lot of people love to go to the gym. They have no problem getting in there 3, 4, 5, maybe 6 days a week and putting the effort in, but maybe not really getting all the benefits that they could with optimal nutrition. And let's start with some best practices. I'm going to start by focusing on macros, and it will break apart separately later on in this episode, micronutrition and supplementation. But for macronutrition, we're really talking about carbs, proteins, and fats. We're talking about the types of each of those macronutrients. And then also one thing that's overlooked is the timing of those nutrients. So let's take it from the top. Let's talk about pre-workout, right? So we're getting ready, we're preparing the body. We want to make sure that we are in an anabolic state. We're fueled up, we're ready to have a really intense hypertrophy training session. I like to start personally having that pre-workout meal. So not your supplementation, your pre-workout shake, but your pre-workout meal roughly 60 to 90 minutes before I lift. And my macro targets on average, and again, this can vary depending on specific goals, but on average, I like to shoot for a carb protein to fat ratio of 15 to 5 to 2. So that's 15 being the carbs, it's about 3-1 to your proteins, and then just a little bit of healthy fats. Um, Personally, some of my favorites, and I encourage you guys to try this, give me some feedback. But most athletes will stick with a carb that's rather starchy and high in the glycemic index for their pre-workout. And you can do two things, right? You could go with like a whey protein or an isolate shake, and you could pair that with a carbohydrate and a little bit of healthy fats, or you could do a whole food meal for that pre-workout. So you have to also play around with this a bit and see what works best for your body, because digestion is also important. If you eat a 6-ounce chicken breast and 200 grams of rice, but that causes you to feel uncomfortably bloated throughout your entire workout, you might be better off switching to like a whey protein isolate and maybe a banana or something that's a little bit easier to digest. So you have to play around with this a bit, work back and forth with your nutritionist, your prep coach, and find a good fit. But on average, stick to that 15 to 5 to 2 carb protein to fat ratio. And then personally, I tend to go with a whey protein shake where you're getting that full spectrum of amino acids, right? You want that full profile so that you can, again, keep your body anabolic. I like starchier carbs that are higher on the glycemic index, something like a cream of rice or, even white rice. But cream of rice is probably my go-to, especially on a really hard leg day, right? You want to maximize the fuel. And you can even pair that with a fast digesting carb where you have maybe 50 to 100 grams of berries or bananas, something like this. And then your healthy fats, MCT oils, always a good choice, right? Medium chain triglycerides, which tend to burn faster than long chain fatty acids. So you've got some flexibility there, but as long as you're staying within those ratios, you should feel pretty primed up and ready to go. Intra workout, that's going to be the next important thing to consider that I believe a lot of people that come to us are lacking. Intra workout, I like to do at least 10 grams of essential amino acids. Normally that will have a full profile, right? Essential amino acids being those aminos that your body can't manufacture and you have to get them through dietary intake like supplementation. And normally those will have some BCAA complex with them and a bit of hydration and things like this. So you can add that in intra workout or during your workout to sustain that energy. And also, more importantly, the EAAs are in the same profile as your muscle tissue. So what happens when we are getting that maximal hypertrophy training? Well, that's one of the 3 mechanisms of hypertrophy. That's exercise-induced muscle damage, which means we're breaking down the muscle tissue and we need to replenish. Therefore, the EAAs or essential amino acids are going to play a very critical role in repairing and rebuilding that muscle tissue. After the EAAs, now this depends too, if you're in a bulking state versus a cutting state for bodybuilding. If you are really trying to grow, build muscle, let's say you're in an improvement phase and you need to put on 10, 15, 20 pounds of muscle. Normally intra workout, I would also pair that with a very fast digesting carb, something like dexanhydrous glucose. You can use a multitude of different, products. There's like Carbolin and other similar products that are going to get you that fast digesting carbohydrate to, again, help spike your glucose and insulin and shuttle in those amino acids. So that's definitely one area I think a lot of people miss out on intra workout. Post workout. Now, that's usually the golden ticket that most people, I'd say about 80% of the people that come to our gym, right? So I own Snap Fitness Kenosha here. And of course, we have our Team Adams Prep, our online coaching brand. I'd say about 80% of people that come to us are missing out on either the timing or the type or the volume, right? The amount of food that they should be eating post-workout. Post-workout, I like to stick with a fast digesting protein and a fast digesting carbohydrate, usually a little bit starchier for the carbohydrate. And again, this does vary depending on your specific needs and goals. But let's just say on average, you normally want to refuel, replenish glycogen. You want to spike your glucose and insulin and start that recovery process right away by flooding your body with essential amino acids and a full spectrum protein, right? So post-workout, I like to keep this within, let's say 30 to 60 minutes at the most of from the time you finish your really intense weight training. You got that kind of 30 to 60 minute window where you want to get this next meal in, right? And normally we'll stick with a protein isolate. So very fast digesting, usually hydrolyzed whey isolate. Fast digesting or starchy carbs. So you could do white rice, you could do more cream of rice, even bagels are very common. Something that's going to give you a bit of glucose and a bit of an insulin spike. And the purpose of that is that the insulin is going to tell the muscle receptors to open up and shuttle in the amino acids and the nutrients that are in the bloodstream, right? So insulin being a holding hormone. One of the few times a day that you might want to spike your glucose and insulin with the specific purpose or a specific outcome of trying to build muscle. And there's an analogy I like to use that maybe resonates with people. Think about your body, your muscles. That's your race car, right? That is your high performance vehicle. And that car is on the racetrack and it suddenly runs out of gas, right? So this would be you post workout. Once that car is out of fuel, are you going to put fuel in that's going to start working 3, 4, 5 hours from now? Or are you going to pour fuel in that's going to work right away, right? You're going to pour fuel in that's going to work right away. And it's the same concept with our bodies. We want that fast digesting carb, fast digesting protein immediately post workout. And that's going to start the recovery process right away. So make sure that you guys are taking advantage of that window. A few things that I know people get wrong, or maybe they're doing it partially right, but there's room to improve, is they'll have a really intense workout at the gym. And then let's say it's 20 to 30 minute drive home, right? So now that's 30 minutes gone. And then they start to cook dinner. And let's say that takes another 30 minutes. And then by the time you actually eat that dinner and digest it, that's another 2.5, 3 hours. That's roughly 4 hours plus or minus that your body has been catabolic, right? So your body ran out of fuel back at the gym and you have now been breaking down muscle tissue and converting it into glucose and energy to fuel the body versus having that very fast digesting post-workout meal to start that recovery process a bit faster. So make sure you guys aren't missing that anabolic window. As cliche as that sounds, that's going to be one of your best friends when it comes to building muscle, improving recovery, and it's going to allow you to get back in the gym faster and start that whole process all over again. If you guys are just joining us, welcome to the Peak Physique Podcast. I'm your host, Andre Adams, and we are talking about best practices for pre, intra, and post-workout nutrition. We spent the first half talking about macronutrients and how we can best optimize those around our workouts. Let's talk about some common mistakes. So we did just talk about the post-workout issue, right? Maybe skipping that post-workout meal, waiting a bit too long, and then missing really that anabolic window where it's now become counterproductive and we've burned through unnecessary muscle tissue, right? And you'll know when you're doing that too, because you'll wake up very sore, very chronically fatigued, right? And you'll notice that you're not really making gains. So you're not seeing the aesthetic physique goals that you think you might be expecting. Maybe your strength and your numbers aren't going up in the gym. It could even be going down. That's a clear indicator that you need to step up your post-workout nutrition game. So another mistake I see is not eating before the workouts. Now, that one can be detrimental for many reasons. One of the more scary reasons is if you're very sensitive to becoming hypoglycemic, it's very common, right? If you wake up, and this is especially important for people that prefer to train early in the mornings, for instance, make sure you're fueling it with that pre-workout meal we just talked about. If not, what can happen is you hit that hypoglycemic state. And I've actually witnessed this at the gym many, many years ago before I even knew what that was all about. And I've seen people that had fainted at the gym, sometimes doing very scary exercises like a leg press, right? Where you can get, seriously injured. And you want to make sure that let's avoid any risk of injury. Let's eat, make sure that you're fueled up and ready to go. But then for two, just the fact that we don't want to be catabolic while we're starting this intense training session, that's really for the bodybuilder, right? That's going to be the most important thing. So we want to make sure that we're not catabolic. And if you're training on an empty stomach and you're going into a very hard leg day, probably will get hypoglycemic at some point, but you're definitely going to be breaking down muscle tissue, which can lead to other bad outcomes such as rhabdomyolysis or just counterproductive muscle wasting, right? So make sure that you eat before the workout. Don't make that common mistake. Another one is not replenishing water that's lost during the workout. Maybe you're a little bit dehydrated to begin with, and then not replenishing the electrolytes to improve overall hydration and muscle function. So make sure that if you're working out really intensely, you should be drinking an average day. I like to say, good rule of thumb, women 2 to 3 liters a day, men 3 to 4 liters a day. If you're working out, try to get an extra 16 to 20 ounces of water and hydration in around your workouts. And it could be something as simple as adding in a Powerade Zero. It could be a hydration stick that's added to your water bottle, but make sure you're replenishing water and electrolytes lost during your training. That's also going to help with digestion and other things, but that's a different topic. And then I would say the other ones for people that are pretty experienced and maybe just not realizing their full potential. Sometimes it's just small refinements, right? There's maybe not these big step changes, but it could be things like not eating the right amount of foods, not eating the right types of foods. And, the timing is off. Like we said, waiting maybe too long post-workout to get that last meal in. So make sure that you're working with a nutritionist to really nail down that specific meal plan and nutrition that works best for your body. And we talked about the pre-workout ratios. I think I forgot to touch on the post-workout ratios. I like to stick with a carb to protein to fat ratio 2 to 3 to 1. So 2 being the carbs, 3 being proteins, 1 being the fats, a very small amount of fats. And again, the protein typically being a full spectrum hydrolyzed whey isolate, something that's going to digest very fast and really start that recovery process for you. So avoid those common mistakes. I promise you're going to make some gains just by making those simple adjustments. Let's talk about micronutrients and some supplementation, things that can further enhance the athlete's experience in the gym, recovery, and muscular development. Some of my favorites for specific to hypertrophy training, if we think about some strength and performance, you got to have the essentials down, right? You've got to be taking a good multivitamin. That's going to help with just normal chemical reactions in the body, nutrient uptake, natural forms of energy production, things like this. So make sure you start with that foundation first. For strength and performance, you can also add in things like creatine, assuming you don't have any issues with creatinine in the blood being elevated and things like this. So always check with your medical professional if you're unsure. But for most athletes, creatine is a great adder to improve your overall strength and muscular endurance and performance. Betaine is another one that I look for in some of that same category. That's going to help with things like muscle hydration. And then, of course, your normal electrolytes, things like potassium and calcium and magnesium, right? These types of nutrients are going to help you perform at your peak for longer during that intense training. Fat burning. So what I like to do for my either pre-cardio or my pre-hypertrophy training to get that extra edge and make sure that my body is primed up and I increase my ability to burn fat. I like things like L-carnitine, right? If you're taking oral L-carnitine, the dosage can vary depending on the individual, but this can range anywhere from 500 to 1500 milligrams. If you're doing injectable forms of L-carnitine, which are becoming more popular, then you're looking at maybe anywhere from 100 to 400 milligrams. Definitely going to help convert more food and fats into energy and improve your overall metabolism. I like to stack that with B complex vitamins, specifically B12 vitamin, which is going to help convert, again, just more food and things like this into energy. And why is energy important? Well, it's going to help you push a little bit harder, keep the intensity high, and then, of course, start that fat burning process for you. Other good ones in that same realm of fat burners would be things like MIC blend. It's going to help stabilize things like blood sugar and fat burning. And then you'll get into other things such as like yohimbine, HCl, very common in bodybuilding. And then beta agonists, which you should always check with your doctors beforehand, because a lot of these things are also medical therapies and must be doctor prescribed. But you'll commonly see in bodybuilding, it's on kind of the gray line between a traditional fat burner and maybe a PED. But you want to at least be aware of things like clenbuterol and albuterol, as well as the associated risks. So those would fall into a category of beta-2 agonists, right? They're going to dilate things like blood vessels in the lungs and increase oxygen saturation and also increase the ability to burn fat. So any of those that you're unsure about, try to avoid the pseudoscience. Ask a professional, especially a medical professional. But there's definitely a lot of different strategies for fat loss that you can stack into your micronutrition and supplementation. Amino acids, probably the most important fundamental thing we have to have in our body if we really want to improve our ability to build muscle and increase hypertrophy. Some of my favorites, I look for things that also stack in not just those essential amino acids or a traditional BCAA complex like, leucine, isoleucine, valine. I like to have things that are high in L-arginine and L-citrulline for maximizing pump, blood flow, and giving that kind of vasodilation effect, right? When you can increase circulation and now you're supplying all the proper nutrients, right? You fixed your macro and micronutrition. Well, guess what? That extra circulation is going to give you a better pump. It's going to maximize hypertrophy, and it's going to deliver more nutrients direct to the muscles. And that's the exact recipe we want for increasing muscle mass over a period of time. Other good ones in that same realm would be L-ornithine, L-glutamine, one of the fundamental building blocks of your muscle tissue. Highly recommend 5 to 10 grams of L-glutamine, either intra or post-workout, anytime you have an intense training session. It's also going to increase your immune system. So all around, it's a great product, great micronutrient to add in there. And then, of course, your traditional BCAAs, either intra or pre-workout or any time of day, especially if you have those long gaps between meals. Things like this will help keep you anabolic. The other thing we'll talk about before we wrap up here are what forms and modalities do these supplements come in, right? The sport of bodybuilding, and let's just call it the health and fitness industry as a whole, has evolved so much over the past decade or two. We went from, I remember growing up, as a kid, my dad had like 2 supplements, and it was this really nasty, chalky tasting protein powder. And there might have even been some form of creatine or amino acids, but all I remember is it tasted like Dayquil, and it was horrible. Fast forward to my, early 20s, you've got a long list of different supplement companies that started to flourish, and you got all these different flavors of proteins and pretty much any supplementation you could think of, right? And now let's fast forward to 2024. Well, now we have not just orally taken supplements, but you have kind of the next level or state of the art, which are injectable vitamins and aminos. You've got IV drip therapies and all these different modalities to receive nutrition. And I think it's amazing. We're learning so much. And here's the beauty in it is there's a little something for everybody. Let's say that you are a client or an athlete with a fatty liver. You might not be able to take so many oral supplements, even though your body needs those for certain processes in the body. Therefore, you can now take injectable vitamins and aminos or, IV forms to receive some of that same nutrient in a different modality, right? Where it bypasses the liver, less stress and strain on that system. So again, I highly recommend looking into some of these services near you. I definitely take advantage of a lot of these. We actually have an episode coming up with a good friend of mine, one of my business partners, Drew Velasco, and we talk about this quite often, but we do IV drip therapies to get the hydration. We get the like trimunity, we would call it. So that'd be ascorbic acid or vitamin C, zinc, glutathione. These things can be used really anytime, but specifically during an intense training cycle. Let's say you're on a contest prep and you're doing a 12-week prep heading into a show. Every day you're breaking down a ton of muscle tissue, and these things like enzymes, toxins in the body, these can start to build up over time. So we want to help eliminate some of that by adding in things like the trimunity, for instance, and detoxing the body. So I highly recommend it for any athlete, whether it's pre or post workout, or it's just something that you work into your lifestyle a couple times a month. You're going to notice some huge benefits for overall health. Guys, that's all we have for today. I hope you enjoyed our talk on nutrition for optimizing hypertrophy and muscular development. If you've got value out of this show, I encourage you to send it to at least one friend. Tell them about the Peak Physique Podcast. We are your #1 resource for everything bodybuilding and muscular development related. Until next time, guys, signing off.